Get out, get out! I'm not coming back, you man!
After looting the rest of the malls around Vosloo, there have been over 150 arrests.
That's a 58-centimeter television
not gonna fit,
screen.
mate.
The recent social unrest that happened in South Africa were a tipping point.
Looting is looting, and looting is crime.
Corporations have been looting this country for centuries.
Those people present themselves as saviors of the poor.
Hunger, deprivation, and poverty. Those are things that you cannot criminalize.
Welcome to the big debate. I'm Ridi Tlhabi. A large crowd enters a shopping mall. Food and clothing shops are ransacked. Bags of maize meal, T-shirts, flat-screen TVs are spirited away. Government responded rapidly. Hundreds were arrested. Their loot repossessed and destroyed. Alleged instigators are in court. Sadly, many people died in the ensuing violence. Explanations for the unrest range from ethnic mobilization to exploitation of the poor and marginalized. Meanwhile, another group of looters mostly work unseen. Illicit bank transfers, a few $100,000 for a minister's son, security upgrades for politicians' homes, free trips to Dubai, a 2 million rand loan for a sports car, cash in black plastic bags delivered monthly. Not to mention the corporate theft from South African consumers by fixing the price of everything from bread to building materials, or huge mining companies and telecoms operators cooking their books and concealing their profits. Did you know that PricewaterhouseCoopers says that the South African corporate elite are the most corrupt in the world? Now, these looters are rarely seen on TV, and the perpetrators are rarely brought to book. Who are the real looters in South Africa? How should we respond to the recent unrest? Do we have the leaders and the vision to put all the looting behind us? Or is this a sign of things to come? Joining me today are Kes Kuvadia, CEO of Business Unity South Africa and former anti-apartheid activist with close historical ties to the ANC. We also have the former public protector, Thuli Madonsela, who was tasked with investigating state looting in the country. Vishwas Sadka, activist and board chairperson of the Cooperative and Policy Alternative Center, and also Philip Dexter, a former NEC member of the ANC, writer and Marxist. I'm also joined by our virtual audience in the big debate. Wave if you can see me from Gauteng, KwaZulu-Natal, Limpopo, what else? Free State, Western Cape, Mpumalanga. Wave if you can see me. Thank you, guys. Thank you for talking to us on the big debate. And in this audience, we have community activists, we have taxi associations, we have self-defense units in communities that came together during the time of the looting. We've got academics, we've got residents, we've got interested South Africans who are ready to just share their thoughts and expertise with us. Welcome to the big debate, all of you. Welcome. Now, you can join the conversation by using the hashtag on your screen right now. Philip, let me start with you. Various explanations were given for the unrest that we saw in July this year, from insurrection to ethnic mobilization to criminal elements. Was there a moment where the government didn't know what to do?
Well, I think it's clear the government was caught completely, off guard. It was something that was instigated in an attempt, to cause unrest, in the light of what was going on inside the ANC. Crime that's caused by poverty, which is opportunistic, where people take a loaf of bread or something, one can understand that. But the bigger question is, why is corruption, crime, and looting so endemic in our country? And I think it's a legacy of the terrible way in which our country was born, of capitalism, colonialism, apartheid, and what has happened in our democracy in many instances. People who are supposed to be leading transformation have simply stepped into the shoes of the former oppressors and are doing exactly as those people did.
Kes Kuvadia, let me bring you in here. What happened was that the police went in, they launched something called Operation Show Us Your Receipt. Why did we have to act against those people at that time? People who took bread and fish oil and flour and so on.
I think that we need to be careful that we don't, in trying to understand why people looted, that we don't then say that it's okay under certain circumstances to do things, even though it's unlawful.
I want to hear from you, Vishwas. Was that right? We understand the context in our country, but in asking why police acted in that way, we shouldn't in any way minimize the damage that any theft or looting does to our society. So, was it the right thing to do?
I think it's important to affirm the rule of law, but I do think that there was a need to nuance the state response after the fact. What we are living through is the deepening of the crisis of an unviable society. And this unviable society has been in the making for over 2.5 decades. And we really have to come to grips with the underlying conditions that have generated this particular moment of infamy. And in this regard, I agree with Philip that yes, we saw factional conflicts spill over from the ruling party, but that's just one side of it. On the other side of it is a state that has completely been hollowed out through corruption, through mismanagement, a crisis of politics, and commitment to serving society. And then, of course, we also have business. Business has had everything on the plate in the post-apartheid context. We've seen profit rates go up. We're seeing a hideous wage gap in the workplace and stark inequality in the society. So if we situate what happened in July in that context, I think we'll realize that those that were desperate and hungry, I think the law and order approach was inappropriate. We've called consistently for those who were hungry to be treated very, very differently.
Right. Let's go to you, Thuli Madonsela. What are your thoughts?
Poverty and inequality did not cause the rioting or the looting. If it was a matter of poverty and inequality, the provinces that would have been on fire would have been Limpopo, Mpumalanga, or Eastern Cape, and all of the other provinces where poverty is at above 70%. What we should understand, though, was that poverty and inequality made the political entrepreneurship possible. And some of us have been warning about this. We have been saying, if we don't make progress on poverty and inequality, political entrepreneurs, those who are able to leverage this sadness, this inequality, this poverty for their political gain, are going to step in. Those people present themselves as saviors of the poor. They don't care a damn. If they cared a damn about these people, they wouldn't have treated them in the manner that they treated them during this particular period.
Can we name these political entrepreneurs? Can we just take accountability from top down?
I will not name anyone because we need evidence, but it is whoever had an opportunity to gain, because there were political issues, there were legal issues that people were facing. And by immediately throwing in this rioting, our focus moved away from the issue that confronted us.
All right. Philip, I want to bring you in there. Is it time to name those people and hold them accountable, bring them to court for the unrest specifically?
Well, I certainly think so. Some crime is caused by poverty. It has its roots in poverty. But some crime is the cause of poverty, and that's the systemic criminal activity that we're seeing in our country. The looting by politicians, the plundering, as Vishwa said. Business is not innocent in this situation either, because corporations have been looting this country for centuries. So I think you're right. We do need to call out those people.
Can we name those people?
Well, I think the security services know who those people are, and they must be charged. It's not for me to come on television and start naming names and find myself in court. It's those people who've got actual physical evidence that need to be the ones to bring them to book. But the point you're making is correct. Those people need to be charged. And fortunately, we've seen some of that start to happen. You know, we're one of the few countries where a president has been charged for the crimes that he's alleged to have committed, where government figures are starting to be prosecuted. You don't see that in many countries. But the point I'm making is that if we don't change the social conditions of this country, as Thuli was saying, then we're scratching at the surface.
Kaz, let me ask you, you're nodding your head there, but business has a lot to answer for, isn't it? In my introduction, I talked about the PricewaterhouseCoopers survey, and South Africa is named amongst the worst countries. I gave examples of tax havens. We know that that happens. We know that people hide their profits and don't reinvest in their communities. So business cannot be absolved of any responsibility in the social conditions that we see in South Africa today.
I agree. So it's got to be in the interest of business to conduct their business, one, ethically, but also to conduct it sustainably broadly, in the sense that it has a positive impact in addressing the poverty and inequality and the unemployment we have. And that's the way we need to do business. And if any particular businesses break the law, then the law must take its course. If the majority of our people do not have a stake in this economy, then, you're not doing business in 20 years' time. It's not rocket science. This thing explodes. I think the kernel of the problem lies in the majority party. And the deployment policies of the majority party make it very difficult for government to operate in an efficient way. And if we don't have a capable, efficient, effective government that can apply the rule of law, then all sorts of people get away with things, whether it's business, whether it's these instigators who I agree, this was instigated and will probably be instigated again. We can't continuously have a situation where decisions taken in the ANC have a significantly negative impact on government.
When we return, we'll also hear firsthand stories of people involved in the looting, some with very tragic circumstances. Stay with us.
The recent social unrest were a tipping point.
Yazi ukuba uzayicinga mva after i-actions uba i-wrong yona.
Mina into eyenza ukuthi ngiyolutha laphaya umama wabantwana abawu-3 ongasebenzi ohlala emkhukhwini.
Welcome back. You are watching The Big Debate. We are discussing the unrest and looting which spread from KZN to some parts of Gauteng in July 2021, set against the backdrop of decades of looting of the state by powerful individuals. We here on The Big Debate spoke to Siphokazi, an informal trader from Alex, whose food business collapsed during COVID lockdowns. She explains why she took part in the looting. Listen to this.
Asazi uba bekuvula bobani kodwa nathi sasiphasi idopha sathatha ukutya kaloku eshop igrocery irayisi impuphu noshukela i-baked beans i-basics nje zasendlini kaloku sisi mna ingxaki yam ndikuxelela andisebenzi ndiphila nge-social grant and futhi enye into eyayenzeka nee-350 zavalwa singasazifumani ke ngoku mabavulile ishop sadobha nathi njengoba abanye abantu bebadobha. Yazi ukuba uzayicinga mva after i-actions uba i-wrong yona ngoba xa siphabe singaziva uba i-wrong yabo ubuzixelela nje uba nawe usiza uyasizakala uzawuthola ukutya. Thina sikutshele sisiqiniso indaba yokuthi uzume bebanjiwe siyovulutha cha singaqamba ma abantu bavula amashop thina sayothatha ukudla besisa ukuthi nathi asinakudla siphethe indlala. It was not because uzume banjiwe.
I think some important takeaways from the video with Siphokazi. She mentions that she's unemployed, that the 350 relief grant was stopped, that when she thinks about it afterwards, looting was wrong, but that they did go out there to take basics like food, baked beans, other essentials that they needed for their well-being, but they reflect on how wrong the action was. But we have an audience member. Welcome to The Big Debate. What do you have to share with us?
Thabiso from Tembisa. Mina into eyenza ukuthi ngiyolutha laphaya umama wabantwana abawu-3 ongasebenzi ohlala emkhukhwini. So uma ngibona abantu behamba bayovula amashop ngibe ngomunye ohambile ovula waye amashop wayothatha laphaya ngesimo engaphansi kwaso ngoba la ngihlala khona umsebenzi yaphuma kodwa ngaphansi kwekhansela esingaphansi kwalo alukhona ukuthi nisinikeze sonke imisebenzi nabantwana mama bahola grant akwenzakala lutho nje ngempilo yami kumile. So isona sizathu mina senzile ukuthi ngize ngiye laphaya ngiyothatha ngoba ngiyasokola nabantwana bami. Kumanje ukudla lokho engangikuluthile akusekho kuphelile ngilambile nabantwana mama. Iyona into izizathu senza ukuthi mina ngize ngihambe ngiyothatha lapha okwakuthathwa khona umsebenzi awukho.
Siyabonga sisi siyabonga. Okay, so Vishwas, I want to come to you now.
Yeah, I mean, I think both these insights are very, very powerful to unsettle the idea that it was just about Zuma. There definitely was instigation, but I think it went way, way beyond that and revealed the deeper underbelly and the desperation and suffering in our society. We entered COVID-19 with a very, very serious hunger crisis in our society, where the state was failing. 14 million people went to bed hungry. When COVID-19 hard lockdown hit, it was very, very clear that both the Solidarity Fund and the state came short. And through the Food Sovereignty Campaign, we were warning government consistently that you needed to do a few things. You needed to democratize the disaster management approach and involve communities and societies in the response. These were just some of the things that we put forward. And of course, we were not listened to. What we are seeing now is the intersection of structural crisis meeting politics. The more the politicians are not willing to address the deeper structural issues, we are going to go deeper and deeper into crisis. And I think this is where the president missed an opportunity when he reshuffled his cabinet. Actually, what he should have done was establish a government of national unity. And we also need a new social contract in the society. And again, our politicians are ducking these issues, and we need these things addressed seriously.
Kez, how do you then reconcile the accountability that business wants stemming from the looting and the reality of being a South African, a hungry, unemployed mother? Very quickly before we hear from Thuli, please.
Speaking personally, I can't stand in judgment of how somebody behaved when they need to put food on the table the next day. I don't think it's the role of business alone, or government alone, or labor alone, or civil society alone, to actually take responsibility for the situation we are facing at the moment. The bottom line is that across the board, we have a failed state. We have a government that cannot take responsibility and cannot account for and do what it has been elected to do.
Thuli, let me bring you in here. We have looters, South Africans who took food and essentials. Many people have called for empathy and amnesty for that looting. What do we do then with the political entrepreneurs who themselves are looting? And we should spend some considerable time on this big debate talking about that level of looting. Are we doing enough?
Really, I'm encouraged by the latest developments in law enforcement when it comes to corruption and other forms of looting in government. You will see that the NPA has all guns blazing in addressing the problem. However, we have to understand that they inherited a hollowed out organization, and therefore it then takes time to rebuild and repurpose it back to what it was constitutionally designed to do. Crime intelligence was repurposed to focus on the enemies of some of the politicians. So it's going to take a while. I do want to empathize with Sipokazi and Thabisa. Their stories were quite poignant, and they do show the pathologies of our society.
We have Kanyisa, an audience member who has a contribution to make.
The recent social unrest that happened in South Africa were a tipping point, which points directly that something ought to be done to address these issues. Otherwise, the country is going to be engulfed with a lot of protest and violent protest and all these elements of criminality as they've been labeled as.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Rita.
Thank you. Philip, I want to bring you in here. We touched on the ANC being the problem, that the factionalism in the ANC are spilling over into the country. And we heard Thuli Madonsela denouncing the idea that the ANC is responsible for the poverty and bringing the historical context. That very well may be true. But it is undeniable that the way that the ANC infiltrates the state, that the way they influence tenders, the way they influence economic policy, has brought us to an extent to where we are today. At the same time, Thuli is excited to see law enforcement being energized after 10 years as opposed of being decimated. But what are we going to do with the fact that some of that enforcement needs to be directed at the ANC itself? There are many people who think that the ANC is a criminal enterprise. I won't share my thoughts on that one, but yeah, I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
The ANC is not a criminal enterprise. It's a liberation movement. I'm a member of the ANC and I'm not involved.
Is it still a liberation movement, or are you being nostalgic about the history?
No, I think the way you're generalizing is not helpful. First of all, you've got to have the historical context. Secondly, I believe that there are criminal elements in the ANC, and I think some of it has been a deliberate attempt to corrupt the ANC, because I think that part of what we're seeing, There's a struggle over resources, which is a class conflict within the ANC itself. And, you know, for every corrupt ANC person, there's a corrupt business person, and not all of them are black. Not all of them are ANC members. To try and suggest that the ANC as an organization is responsible for this is wrong. But what we are responsible for as the ruling party is to fix the problem. And I think that's the accountability that we should be asking for. We have seen good things, as Thuli was saying, but it's not enough. We were elected into power, and in certain instances, we have failed to deal with those problems. And for that, I agree with you. The ANC must take responsibility.
So, Vishwas, what do you say? The ANC is still a liberation movement?
I fundamentally disagree with Philip. I mean, national liberation movements have shown a tendency to criminalize their politics. The Indian Congress in India, within a decade, was criminalized as a political organization. We've seen it in Southern Africa amongst liberation movements. In the South African context, you know, whether you look at the moment of the arms deal, at the birth of our democracy, which the ruling party drove very hard in South Africa and opened the door and the floodgates to the kind of looting practices we've seen, to the failure of local governments. We see the Auditor General reports year after year ringing the alarm bell of this deep systemic looting that's happening in local governments. We are seeing the Zondo Commission moving closer to quantifying the scale of looting. We're talking here about billions and billions of public money taken away. So we are really sitting in a mess, and the ruling party has to take responsibility for the mess that it has taken us into. Our democracy cannot continue on this trajectory. I don't trust the ANC with the future of South Africa.
Thuli, very quickly, while we still have you, people like Sipogazi and some of our audience members, all they see is that ordinary people are being hounded by the police and being called to account. Meanwhile, the political entrepreneurs, for example, will have the resources, the access to the courts to delay a reckoning with justice. How do we assure citizens that everybody who's looted in whatever way is equal before the law, regardless of resources?
We need a huge social accountability movement in South Africa that keeps reminding us who are the ones who are evading justice and what does it mean to the average person. Much as it pains me that the Gogo Dlaminis who got involved in the looting because of the push and pull factors are now being held accountable. I do know that, really, that if we don't hold them accountable, we'll soon be without a country, because people will join these things because they are hungry, and they will be utilized to destroy this country and raise it to the ground.
All right, we'll hear more from our audience members when we return. We will also hear a tragic story from people caught in the crossfire between looters and vigilantes. Don't go away. Welcome back to the big debate on looting. Now, one of the many things that dominated the news during the July unrest were community members who set out to guard areas like Phoenix, Soweto, and Verulam. Sadly, we saw injuries and deaths as community members turned on one another. Let's speak to Tashlene Moodley, a Verulam resident. I need to add that Verulam was created as an Indian township under apartheid, but is now home to Indian and Black African residents, amongst others. Now, Tashlene, welcome to the big debate.
Hi there, I'm Tashlene. My son was Fabian, 17 years of age. From the 12th of July, he was helping the community, barricading the roads, stopping looters from coming through the community, till the 13th of July, where he lost his life tragically in a shootout. There was a crossfire, that's what I was told, and I don't have answers to my child's death. I'm still lost. I'm looking for answers. The government has let me down. I am very, very disappointed in the government. I feel that if the president and our government could have deployed the army sooner, this could have been avoided. Innocent lives could not have been lost, and we could have been safe. I also feel that my son was not a soldier to be standing out there. We have soldiers that the army could have deployed, and it was not his place. And he was not at that age to be standing out there protecting his family. I have a 70-year-old mother. I have a sister who suffers from high blood pressure, and I have smaller kids that my son wanted to protect.
Tashlin, I'm very, very sorry for your immeasurable loss. Thank you for talking to us on the big debate. I just want to add that when the Jacob Zuma Foundation egged on the looters and the government supported community self-defense initiatives, which in some cases became vigilantism, did they think about families such as this one? It seems to me like people's lives have been lost fighting battles on behalf of the political elite who are not in front of the courts having to account for these actions. Is there an audience member who has something to say about what you've just heard, who's trying to make sense of the violence and the divisions within our society?
What worries us most as the people who are working with the Phoenix Residents Association is the fact that there are politicians who do not care and who utter incitement that want to continue with what is happening there. What has happened is unlawful, and justice must take its course. The thugs and the gangsters that killed people on that day. And I want to dismiss the fact that Indian people are racist. I was born in Bambai, in one of the communities where people are affected. I was raised there. I grew up side by side with some of my friends living in harmony. We cannot say, therefore, when a handful of people are racist against Black people, and we say that the entire Indian community is racist.
The EFF marched to Phoenix, and what we saw on our television screen is that the aftermath, the violence, affected community members there.
A family has lost a 17-year-old child. People in Bambai, Zwelicha, and Amauti have lost their loved one, the breadwinners. Some of them were just walking by and were shot and killed. And we need some form of reconciliation between the two communities. So if you look at in Bambai, there's extreme poverty. People are going through a difficult time on a daily basis because their councillors are corrupt, because services in the cities are not provided to the people in the Black areas. And this is a perpetuation of this current government to continue with the apartheid special planning in the provision of services to both communities.
Philip, let me bring you in here. We acknowledge that some of the problems are historical. We acknowledge that some of the problems are inherited. But here we hear Abahlali Basemjondolo saying this government, the ANC government whom you support, has continued the apartheid spatial planning. And secondly, we have poor people, poor communities now turning on each other. But Jacob Zuma's son is in Dubai. Jacob Zuma's daughter was egging them on social media. The Jacob Zuma Foundation is right there asking for people to donate, to make financial contributions to Jacob Zuma. Nobody is talking around the political moment that was a catalyst for these tragic events. Your thoughts?
No, I think that's not true. Many of us have spoken about that, many within the ANC, yourself and many outside of it. As I said, the ANC is failing in some respects in a spectacular fashion. But my view is the ANC is the only organization that you can strengthen who can make the difference. If there's another organization, voters will vote for it. I'm not in any way condoning what anyone did. All of those people that you've mentioned, the Zuma Children, the Jacob Zuma Foundation, all of those organizations must be held to account for what they've said and done. But the point I'm making is that if we just focus on that, we are not going to deal with the systemic problem that is it's intertwined, it's almost embedded in the state. And that was put there historically.
We have an audience member here who wants to talk to us, Megs Naidu. I know that you are a prolific commentator on South African matters. What are your thoughts here?
Oh, firstly, I want to say that I'm finding this program spectacularly anti-poor. The bulk of the conversations have been that the fundamental problems of our country are the consequence of poverty, unemployment, inequality, and that's wrong. The problems of this country, as Philip alluded to earlier on, are systemic. This was illustrated very clearly when Zizi Kodwa went to the Zondo Commission. It was a revelation to him that there's a thing called ethics.
You explain to us how the ANC chooses leaders who don't understand what ethics are.
There's a legacy around that. We know that when Thabo Mbeki left the ANC presidency, he had got rid of the next level of leadership. Zuma, as bad as he is, did something about building up that leadership, but they were all crooks, mainly crooks. The task, unfortunately, has fallen on to Cyril Ramaphosa to fix that. But as we all know, Ramaphosa's a ditherer. But at the moment, he's the best we can have for president in this country.
Thank you very much. Vicious, I do want to get your thoughts. I mean, Meg says President Cyril Ramaphosa is the best we can have under the circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very problematic conception of politics, where we think that big men in power are going to solve the problems. And that's not the case. I think what has come through very, very clear is that our constitutional contract, which binds the state to protect us, to give us safety, was basically jettisoned in the moment of July. The state was absent and it couldn't deliver to people. The ANC structures in KwaZulu-Natal particularly could not stand up and stop the violence. In a sense, they were partly implicated in it. But community leadership stepped up. Community leadership stopped the worst of what could have come. It wasn't Cyril Ramaphosa. It was the people at the ground. And it's the very same people that are building a just peace right now under very, very difficult circumstances. They are not going to be able to solve the nation-building challenge on the ground. There's a need for the state to recommit to a non-racial nation-building project in this country, which is inclusive, which brings the majority into our democracy and meets their needs. It addresses the systemic problems, including worsening climate crisis, inequality, etc. Those things have to come together with the leadership that's emerging in communities, and that's where the future lies.
All right, we have an audience member, Melita. You want to make a contribution? Go ahead, please, Melita.
Corruption iqala indaba zokuthi abantu bahambe bayolutha basuke benzwa ukuthi namakhansela nawo ayalutha. We have a councillor la eWard 90, ikhansela lethu ulele Ward 90 liluthile ama-food parcel line case nakho konke but bayalibuyisela ukuthi libe ikhansela futhi ikhansela ile ANC. Bese sibuye futhi sibe ne-Department of Housing. I-Department of Housing lana sihambile saya ilocally zonke lezo itepe nakhona balutha ama-RDPs wabantu. Uma usufikile national ufuna i-answer, what do they do? Bayakutshela ukuthi asikakwazi ukuthi sidile nabo locally. Manje abantu ba-homeless, abantu baxakekile. That's why ngabe babhadala i-rent mase kuvela i-opportunity enjengalena bayahamba futhi bayolutha bona umphakathi because of uzolutha i-RDP yakho ikhona i-approviwe uphethe iphepha lelo liphethe elikhombisa ukuthi ufanele uye ungene ku-RDP, but at the end of the day somebody uhlala kuyo i-government officially iluthile indlu yakho inemali and i-rich ngenxa yalokho.
Siyabonga Melita, and Thuli, I do want to come to you there because you really emphasize the fact that even the Gogo Dlamini, as heartbreaking as their looting has been, what they see is the powerful just getting away with it and seeing no accountability. How do we rise above that? How do we get out of that, Thuli?
So how do we address the circumstances or the push factors that drive people to exploit opportunities for looting? Let's make sure that that grant is not only made permanent, but also increase in number. I don't believe in those who are academically telling us that we have to give people jobs and not 350 rand. It's not either or. In an ideal world, government creates circumstances for business to create jobs. Where the ANC has failed, and the DA in the Western Cape has failed, is in disrupting that architecture of the South African society that disabled the African majority, the colored majority, and those of Asian origin from being fully capable of starting, growing, and sustaining their own businesses. So we need to do that.
So what is the best way to stop looting in our country? Some argue that looters should be granted amnesty and others believe they should face the full might of the law. What about looters in Luthuli House or other political parties and corporate South Africa? What do they think? Join the conversation on social media. You're watching The Big Debate. Welcome back to The Big Debate on looting. What does justice and accountability look like when the rich can buy their way out of prosecution, whereas the poor are arrested, prosecuted, and jailed almost immediately? Do we have a double standard? And how can we stop all the looting in South Africa? Right now, I really want to hear from you, members of the audience. Right now, the floor is yours as an audience member to tell me what you make of this and what you think of this. Who wants to go first? Let's see. Okay, Nhlanhla Lux, I see you. And if I'm not mistaken, you were quite a player, as it were, at the Maponya Mall, preventing widespread looting. Just make sense of this for us. What do you want to share?
To be honest with you, some of us were in the front line of defending the infrastructure against looting. And we were in the line of people that were shot at plenty times, not one day. I'm talking many other days. So we confronted the looters. It's safe for me to tell you firsthand experience that the looters were not the poor people. The looters were organized people with rifles that were set out to make sure that they attack the economic infrastructure of our township. Now, I speak for Soweto, not the entire South Africa. I'll tell you what happened in Soweto. The people that are shooting at us are not people from our community. So it was a proper organized criminal activity that was influenced by politics. I do not care. I'm not a politician. I'll tell you straight as it is. And it's very disappointing to hear people like Philip not taking full responsibility of the problem. How can we then trust them with the solution?
Nhlanhla, thank you very much for that. So speaking about the political insurrection that was first spoken about, that's what you saw. Let's go to Lolo. Lolo, what do you have to add to this?
I'm quite disappointed with the conversation, and that's because I cannot accept or condone any justifications for what we saw in July. You know, I reject the idea that every single time a law is broken, the society has to be held guilty instead of the lawbreakers. You know, sometimes people have to be held accountable for their actions. You know, if poverty was the cause, as rightfully the professor pointed out, there are provinces which are far more poor. If inequality was the cause, as once again the professor pointed out, the Western Cape is far more unequal, and we didn't see the same kind of violence. The reality is we need to cultivate a culture where people won't engage in such actions, where they have responsibility for their community, for their lives, because we cannot seek to build the kind of society each of us are talking about if all the time we're all just going to burn it down. You know, people need to be responsible. We need personal responsibility.
I've been saying that for the longest time in South Africa, we have been dealing with high rate of unemployment, and the government is not doing anything. Only if the youth were involved economically, the lootings won't be that much, because obviously the youth doesn't have anything to do. So whenever they get a chance to loot, they do because they are hungry. And then the ANC is just giving excuses over excuses. It doesn't help with the high rate of unemployment. They looted the 500 billion last year, and then now they're giving out 350. The government is not assisting South Africans after many years of fighting for the freedom, but then still we are not free economically.
Somebody once said there's no point crying over spilled milk. So we can all sit back and blame everybody in terms of accountability, etc. But there needs to be some sort of resolution or a solution from the government. You know, from what happened in the 11th cannot be fixed. So let's start looking at a solution forward.
I strongly condemn the looting. But we also understand that our people are not employed. Since our people are not employed, to get something to eat, they can do whatever it takes. So yes, looting was well planned by some people, but abantu who's been used to do this thing is the poor people and the people who are living in the streets. Government wethu akenzanga ngokwanele to protect our people and also the businesses. Ngoba ukube kuthiwa babenze lokho, mhlambe i-intelligence yethu yayikwazile ukuyihlela kahle, ibone ngezinto ezizokwenzeka in time. Mhlambe babezokwazi ukuyivikela amabhizinisi nomphakathi wethu. And also nabantu bethu abagcine belahlekelwa imiphefumulo ngalento yeluthini. Mangabe uzobuka lapha ePhoenix, there are a lot of people who lost their lives. So ukube kuthiwa ugovernment wethu a serious lento. So the solution is they must create job opportunities just to avoid all those things. Thank you.
Looting is looting, and looting is crime. And I hear people crying about unemployment and hunger. But when you do looting, you worsen the situation. people are still unemployment and people are still hungry. It just worsen the economy of the country. Thank you.
We've been doing research into basic income grant pilots experiments that have been happening around the world. And what we find is that there's a correlation between what was taken by people during July from the shops in South Africa to what participants in basic income grant experiments across the world spend their money on. They spend the money on food, on other basics, durable goods such as stoves, microwaves, and so on. And those are exactly the things that were taken here in South Africa during July. And it points to the fact that people are living in hunger, deprivation, and poverty. And those are things that you cannot criminalize. We need to deal with the root causes of all of these things in South Africa. And the beginning place would immediately a basic income grant to provide people with basic security. Thank you.
For me, when I look at the looting, specifically looking at the July looting, I always decode it into two, the white collar crime or looting by politicians and their associates, together with corporate sector, as already has indicated earlier on, and then the looting that we saw in July, which also is divided into two, the opportunists or instigators that Ulax has referred to, and the very poor people and hungry people that we've heard in this broadcast. To deal with that, really government needs to take leadership in dealing exactly with the systemic issues that Philip, together with Max, have alluded to.
Kumele sibheke ngazo zonke indlela possible. Lento le looting iqalwe nge-unemployment rates. Mawungabheka manje mawu-2000 ungafundanga it's an embarrassment. Ama-2000 sifundile, we are very educated, but masithi sifuna imisebenzi asiyitholi. And mawusubheka emakhaya sihlala siyi-14 endlini bayithiwa abantu abasebenzayo. I-COVID mayifika abazali ba-retrench manje akusena next akunakuthi ongenayo. So masibona ama-opportunities aso siyawathatha thina ama-opportunities aso siyawasebenzisa because akunalutho endlini silambile. And mangathi uthatha ukubheka sithatha only the basic things. Asithatha ama-furniture, no, sithatha ukudla into ezohlala esiswini.
When we return, a last word from our panel on how South Africa can wipe out looting in the future. Don't go away.
Probably with a question to Philip as he is closing, what is it that the ANC government is doing to dismantle the systemic challenges that our country is faced with? Thanks a lot.
Welcome back to the big debate. How do we deal with looting at all levels in South Africa? Do we have the leadership and the vision to tackle it? I want to hear final thoughts from our panelists. Kez, I'll start with you. The future, moving forward.
We need to come together as a country. And it's got to be under the leadership of government. I hear what Vish says about big men and so on. I agree with that. But we have a government that we have elected. They've got to take responsibility. They've got to show some accountability. But business, government, labor, and community groups have got to come together. And that's what we basically need. And
will business do its part,
Kez?
Pay people fair wages, invest in communities, invest in our economy so that we create employment, not inflate the costs of basic food, not hide taxes, that kind of thing. Will business do its part?
Absolutely. And I think this thing about business being the absolute culprit, I just don't think it's correct. I mean, business has been for the last 1.5 years supporting government in managing the pandemic and rolling out the vaccine for free.
Thank you, Kez. And Vishwas, your closing comments.
I think we agree that law and order is the starting point, but not the be-all and end-all of dealing with what we're grappling with. From that perspective, yes, political instigators have to be dealt with, whether they're linked to the Zuma family or the ANC or not. Those that instigated racist vigilante violence, whether in Phoenix or any other communities, have also got to be dealt with. We've got to see visible, decisive leadership to break this pattern of impunity. And hopefully that will come to the fore now as we in the post-July moment. I think the second important issue, and we haven't resolved this tension in the conversation, I mean, what constitutes a crime? Now, you set up a spectrum of looting for us. I still maintain that a person who is hungry, who has the Constitution standing behind them, that gives them the right to access food, and the state fails them, they are faced with a very, very difficult choice of reproduction, of survival. On the other hand, somebody who puts their hand into the public purse and consciously steals to enrich themselves, that's another category of looting in itself. And I think these distinctions are very, very important, and we have to make them. But finally, if the systemic issues of inequality, poverty, etc., are not addressed coming out of July, the next time these things are triggered, South Africa as a whole will burn. And I think that is why the kind of social contract we need in society is going to have trade-offs, and business is going to have to give a lot to ensure we have a viable society. Thank you.
Philip, closing comments?
Well, I think in answer to the question that was put to me, the ANC has policies and it has implemented things that have made a difference. But unfortunately, I think we haven't gone far enough. And as a result, those systemic issues that we've been talking about have caught up with us. And I think the first thing that the ANC needs to do is address the situation within the organization itself, as we've seen the disarray in recent times. And that really is something that starts with the president. Secondly, we've got to address the weaknesses in the state so that we're able to do the basic things like law and order, deliver water, electricity, and basic services to people. Thirdly, we've got to have an economic strategy that transforms the nature of our economy. Currently, our economy is no different to the way it was under apartheid. The political economy of post-apartheid South Africa is basically the political economy of apartheid South Africa. Same poverty, same inequality, same unemployment. So we must fight all looting, all corruption, and all injustice if we want to see the kind of change and the sort of country that the Freedom Charter says we should be.
Thank you very much. Well, will we ever see an end to the looting that's become the norm from the top down? Do we have the leaders we need to set the right example? And what about poverty and inequality? After 27 years, do we have the political will to create a more equal, inclusive society where populist politicians will no longer have the foot soldiers to recruit to fight their battles? You decide. I'm Ridi Tlhabi, and this is The Big Debate.